Okay, so imagine the entire rulebook for American elections just got a major rewrite. Well, that's pretty much what just happened. On January 14th, the Supreme Court handed down a decision in a case called Boast v. Illinois, and it completely changes who gets to challenge election laws. This is a big deal, and it's going to impact pretty much every future race in the country. Let's break down exactly what this means.
At the very heart of this whole thing is a really simple but incredibly powerful question. Who actually has the right to sue over election rules? For years, the answer has been surprisingly complicated, full of legal hurdles. But with this new ruling, the Supreme Court has drawn a much clearer line in the sand.
So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll get into the case that sparked this new rulebook. Then we're going to demystify this key legal term you'll hear a lot about, standing. After that, we'll dive right into the court's final decision, look at the two very different reactions to it, and finally, we'll explore what this all means for elections going forward. All right, let's start with the case at the center of it all. Bost versus the Illinois State Board of Elections. This wasn't just some local dispute, it ended up setting a whole new national standard. So let's boil this down to the basics. The case, Bost v. Illinois, asked a really fundamental question. Can a political candidate sue over election rules they think are unfair or even illegal? And on January 14th, in a decisive 7-2 ruling, the Supreme Court gave a clear answer. Yes. They said candidates absolutely have a concrete and personal stake in the fairness of the rules themselves. Now, to really get why this is such a game changer, we have to talk about a legal concept that basically acts as the gatekeeper to the courtroom. It's a little thing called standing. And believe me, this isn't just some abstract legal theory. Just think back to the 2020 election. There were more than 60 lawsuits filed challenging the results, and the vast majority of them, they were dismissed before a judge even looked at the evidence. The main reason for all those dismissals was that the court said the people suing simply lacked standing. So what on earth is legal standing? Well, in the simplest terms, it means you have to prove that you have a real, personal stake in the outcome of a case. You can't just sue because you're a concerned citizen who disagrees with a law. Nope. You have to show the court that you've been directly harmed in a concrete and specific way. It's basically your ticket to even get inside the courthouse doors. And this brings us right back to Illinois. So the state has this law that says mail-in ballots can still be counted if they arrive up to 2 weeks after Election Day. A group of Republican candidates, led by Congressman Mike Bost, sued. Their argument was that this 14-day window essentially created multiple election days, which they said violates federal law. But the lower court threw the case out. Why? It said the candidates couldn't prove this rule had directly harmed them or cost them any specific votes. In other words, they lacked standing. Of course, the candidates didn't stop there. They appealed, and the fight went all the way up to the Supreme Court. So let's take a look at how the highest court in the land finally settled this. The final vote was a pretty solid 7-2, siding with the candidates. But as you can see, the reasoning wasn't totally uniform. You had 5 justices who signed on to the main majority opinion. Then you had 2 justices who agreed with the final result, but wrote their own separate reasons. That's what a concurring opinion is. And then you had 2 justices who disagreed completely, and they wrote the dissent. So a clear majority, for sure, but not a totally unified one. And here's the absolute key takeaway from their ruling. The Supreme Court basically redefined what harm means in this context. They said a candidate's personal stake isn't just about whether they win or lose. It's about their fundamental right to compete in a fair race that's run according to the law. The harm, they said, is being forced to compete in a contest where the rules themselves might be unlawful. To make this idea really hit home, Chief Justice John Roberts came up with a fantastic analogy. He said, think of it like this. It's like you're running a 100-meter dash. But then, after the race has started, someone decides to move the finish line to 105 meters. The injury isn't just about whether you end up winning or losing. The real injury is that the fundamental rules of the race were changed while you were in the middle of competing. As you can probably guess, a decision this big did not land quietly. The reaction was immediate and deeply divided. Is this a huge win for protecting our elections, or did the court just open the door to complete chaos? On one side, you have supporters hailing this as a major victory for election integrity. They argue it finally gives candidates the power to challenge questionable rules before an election happens, not just after. But on the other side, critics are sounding the alarm. They warn this will open the floodgates to a deluge of litigation. They're worried that candidates will now sue over every little thing, from the font used on a ballot to where a drop box is placed, clogging up the courts and maybe even disrupting laws designed to make voting easier.
Okay, so what are the actual real-world consequences here? Now that the Supreme Court has made its decision, what happens now?
Well, a few things happen right away. First, the original Illinois case isn't actually over. It gets sent back down, the legal term is remanded, to the lower court, which now has to make a final ruling on the 14-day ballot extension law itself. But the much bigger impact is immediate and nationwide. This new rule on standing applies everywhere, right now. That means we can definitely expect to see more lawsuits challenging voting rules before elections happen. And states like Washington and Mississippi, which have similar ballot counting laws, could easily become the next legal battlegrounds. So let's zoom out and put it all together. Why does this one ruling matter so much? Because it fundamentally redefines who has the power to sue over election rules, and it gives a lot more of that power to candidates. It's almost certain to impact mail-in and absentee voting laws all across the country, and it shifts the timing of these legal fights, setting the stage for more battles before an election even begins. But maybe most importantly, it changes the entire focus of these lawsuits, from proving you are harmed to just proving the rules of the game are fair.
Which really leaves us with the one massive question moving forward. Did the Supreme Court just give candidates a vital new tool to safeguard democracy? Or did they just hand them a powerful new weapon for partisan warfare? That's the question that future elections are now going to have to answer.